If you remember this banger from Vacation Bible School, sing along with me. I don't want to be a goat, no. I don't want to be a goat, no. They haven't got any hope, no. I don't want to be a goat, no. I just want to be a sheep. I just want to be a sheep. I pray the Lord my shepherd keep. I just want to be a sheep. Yeah, it's a cute song, right? Jennifer said I need to bring the food this morning. And we're all awake. Yeah, but the truth is, I know plenty of Christians who really, really don't like that metaphor of Christian as sheep. They kind of balk at it because sheep smell. And aren't we to be the fragrance of Christ? Sheep are dumb, and we're supposed to be wise. Sheep can't even find the grass where they're supposed to eat if they're not led to it. Sheep follow. They'll follow right off the edge of the cliff. And we're supposed to be discerning and go out front with the banner of Christ. I don't want to be a sheep, but a fish. There's a metaphor I can get behind. Christian as fish. That conjures up goodness and brightness and color and freedom, and it also is a metaphor for the people of God that runs through the whole canon of Scripture. Starting there in Ezekiel 47, we have this river of life that flows from the sanctuary of God. You remember that story? And the water gets deeper and deeper with Ezekiel, and these swarms of living creatures come to life all around him. And we have that recurring image at the end of the Bible in Revelation 22, this same river of life where all the nations are gathered, and the tree of life is there, and right in the middle of the whole thing, we have a conversation with Jesus and Peter about fish and discipleship. It's really a great metaphor. And if we put ourselves in it, we get to pick what kind of fish we want to be. So which one would you choose? All the sea creatures swarming in this river of life. Which one would you be? Because we have options now, right? With sheep, you got two choices. You're the sheep or the black sheep. That's it. But with fish, I mean, you could be an angelfish. You could be a sawfish. They're handy and practical. You could be the prize bass or a sturdy trout. You could be a seahorse or one of those glow-in-the-dark neon type. I mean, you be you. We have all sorts of choices. They're all gathered in here. Flying fish, independent fish, the extroverted clownfish, introverted hermit crabs. I kid you not, there is a fish called the sarcastic fringe head. And if there was ever a spirit animal for me, I mean, that is the fish right there. We can choose anything we want, thriving in this river of life. It is a metaphor that is Edenic and eschatological. I just want to be a fish. Swish. And won't it be glorious when the whole world is saturated with the Spirit of God? From horizon to horizon, there will be no place where we can swim, where the presence of Christ is not imparting abundant life upon us, this incomprehensible peace and justice and goodness and joy that equips us to swish all day and never get tired. And the chaos of the deep is brought into order, and there won't be any more hurricanes beaching us onto shore or plastic trash strangling our necks. And the sharks, they're going to use their teeth for smiling. And electric eels, they're going to light the way for the younger fish to find their way home. Swarms of living creatures, won't it be amazing? But we're not there yet, are we? In this time where the Spirit's flow absolutely is powerful, sharks bite. Those independent whippersnappers, they get lost out there in the open sea. And when the starfish raise their arms up to reach for their dreams, they get cut off by boat motors, and puffer fish are blowing themselves up, taking up more space than is rightfully theirs. Scorpions shoot fire, jellies sting. Which fish were you again? we really have no business being out there. It's dangerous. It's deadly. It's chaos out there in the open sea. So, fellow fish, for right now, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was cast into the sea and gathered together all kinds of fish. And that net, it's not like the nets I would give Caleb and all my other kids when we go to the beach in North Carolina to gather up seashells. It's not like that. And it's not a casting net like you read about earlier in Matthew's gospel. No, this is a drag net. Your translation might word it that way. And they're huge. They're 6 feet tall and 300 feet wide. That's a football field, my Texas friends. Massive. With floats on the top and weights on the bottom, and they would connect this dragnet to 2 different ships that would move in a half circle, so it would scoop up everything in its path. The kingdom of heaven is to be gathered into a dragnet, safe from the dangers and chaos of the open sea. And Matthew really likes this word, tsunado, gathered. He uses it 24 times compared to just 5 or 6 times in the other Gospels. And when Matthew uses this word, gathered or to be gathered, very often he means to be brought near to the saving presence of Christ. And so, fish, as we wait for the fullness of time, we are gathered together with all kinds of fish. Like we are right now. This morning, it's beautiful. We got largemouth bass from Texas and these sarcastic fringe fish from North Carolina all in the same room. It's like a great thing. And, there's some trout among us who are slow and steady, and betta fish who always want to try something new. We've got jellies who bake these rich pastries from Europe, and crustaceans, saute and savory dishes from Asia. We've got red mullets who vote one kind of way and bluefin tuna who vote another. We've got anchovies, you gotta love them or hate them. Rainbow fish. Gathered in this net are moonfish who sleep all day and sunfish who sleep all night. There's sea turtles in here with their hard exteriors who make relationship impossible no matter how many times you try to get to know them. Right next to the lionfish who spill out every thought they have without a filter onto social media, causing all kinds of problems in your church. Gathered up in this net are needlefish with vices that pierce like sexism and racism, flopping around next to the sardines who succumb to sexual immorality and abuses of power. There are shrimp in here who dance the 2-step and marlins the merengue. There's fish who greet each other with a kiss, and others who slap fins, fish who go to school, fish who don't, gars who gaslight, paradise fish who protest. The kingdom of heaven is like a net that was cast into the sea and gathered together all kinds of fish. Yeah. So maybe the strong fish among us, right? We could find a way to toss out the stinky ones and feed them to the sharks. We could organize and push the bad fish up to the top where they would die for lack of oxygen because those gars are getting on my nerves. Those marlins, they're tearing up the net. And this is the net. This is where we are brought near to the saving presence of Christ. This is the transportation to the place where we can swim and never get tired, where there is no more crying, where there is no more dying, where the tree of life grows on the shores of the river with leaves for healing. We can't leave the net. It's deadly out there. Salvation is right here in the net, but there are all kinds of fish up in here. And when I read through Matthew, I think Matthew's audience felt cramped and bothered by the other fish gathered up in the net too. I think they too were desperate for some clarity on who was a good fish and who was a bad fish. Who's righteous, who's evil, who's clean, who's unclean, who's got to go. Because this distinction for them was so clear. there for so many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years until suddenly it wasn't, right? In AD 70, that temple is gone, that place where the priest could announce publicly in front of everybody, by this sacrifice of turtle doves, you are good. It's gone. In a violent extermination. In the Jewish-Roman wars, Matthew's audience witnessed starvation inside those city walls, the massacre of men, women, and children. Most of you have probably read Josephus' account of that first Jewish-Roman war, where he said, famine drove the starving to gnaw at anything. In the end, they were eating belts and shoes, and the leather stripped off their shields. And those who escaped the extermination, who found solace in the diaspora, they had to depend on that clarity coming from the synagogues, from Jewish leaders doing the best they could in teaching and dialogue and community to determine these things, who's in, who's out, who's dirty, who's clean. What was once so very clear is now murky, shrouded in trauma, the pain of exile, and a lot of questions about the goodness of God and what in the world God is up to right now. And many blame Christians for the whole thing. Jewish Christians too. So eventually these Jewish Christians in Matthew's audience, they are cast out even from those synagogues. The Jewish Christians, after war and starvation, exile, fleeing from their lives, they're cast out again by the only family they thought they had left into the open sea, loose and lost in chaos. And Jesus says to them, the kingdom of heaven, it's like a net that was cast into the sea and gathered together all kinds of fish. You are not forgotten. I see you, and you are brought near to the saving presence of Christ. In fact, closer than you ever were in those concentric circles of the temple. You are gathered into a new family. And some of those family members gathered up in here, they're Greek, and you're going to find their history and their traditions dirty and very unappealing. And some of these new family members are from the hill country in Samaria who are worshiping your God so differently than you, you're going to wonder if you're even worshiping the same God. And some of those gathered up with you, they're going to be enslaved people, and some of them will own people, and some of them are going to be independent, outspoken women, benefactors, and wealthy. And some of these family members with you in the net, they're not even going to know Moses from Malachi, and you're going to find that really, really ignorant. And some of them are Roman, the people who killed your family. But you all confess Jesus as Lord. And together, you make a family gathered. And it is good news to have a people, isn't it? If you've ever been that person who's been kicked out, who's been exiled, who has been isolated, rejected, you know what good news it is to have a people, amen? But man, there's all kinds of fish in here. So who's going to determine who's right and wrong among us? Who gets to decide who's in and who's out? I mean, somebody's got to make these determinations about being clean and dirty and enact some judgment upon the sinners. The fish don't. Fish do fish things. Fish flop about in the net, bothered and offended, shocked that some of these other fish got gathered up with us. But, God isn't. God knew all along that this is the nature of fishing. This parable, really weird, you probably haven't heard much talked about this particular tiny parable hidden in the middle of Matthew. This really weird one. It's a matter-of-fact metaphor about the realities of how drag nets work. The net, Like the Word of God that was cast out far and wide in creation, it catches all kinds of fish. And this is not a flaw in the system. This is the abundant love of God. This is not a mistake. This is grace. This is not a surprise to God that those fish got gathered up in here too. It's the reality of fishing with a net, and drag nets gather up sharks, some of whom still use their teeth to bite. And drag nets gather up eels who still sting. They gather up mudfish who lay at the bottom of the net all day and will not participate in church no matter how many times you ask them to do it. They gather up octopi who hoard and refuse to share. Drag nets gather up you and me. All kinds of fish. And this reality about how drag nets work by the expansive, inclusive, radical welcome of God really bothers the fish. The sarcastic fringe heads included. I'm struggling with the other fish gathered up in this net. And I got more questions about it, I think, every month that goes by. In fact, we could probably think of someone right now who we know who has chosen to leave the net entirely because of the other fish gathered up in the net. And I think God knew this too. God knew how hard it would be. I imagine that's why we're gathered in the net, in the water, where that sanctifying flow of the Spirit erodes the hardness of our hearts and makes us new, even His heart, even hers. And the Spirit gives Matthew some guidance to help with this precarious situation in which we find ourselves, waiting and waiting for Revelation 22 to come about. In Matthew chapter 18, Jesus shares with the gathered these words. You know them, very familiar words. If your fellow fish sins against you, go to him and point out their fault just between the two of you, and if they listen to you, you've won them over. But if they don't listen, take one or two other fish along, so that everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. And if they still refuse to listen, well, tell it to the gathered. And if they refuse to listen even to them, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there with them. And then this cramped and disgruntled fish named Peter came to Jesus and said, but Lord, how many times do I forgive that fish who sinned against me? Like up to 7 times? And Jesus is like, no, Peter, not 7. 70 times 7, my fellow fish. In the home and the hope and sometimes cramped and offensive space of the net, fish are discerning. Fish get to call out sin humbly and compassionately, and fish are comforted knowing that Christ is there bearing witness with them in the net. Fish get to forgive again and again, and fish are permitted to hold boundaries, not clicks, but boundaries. But fish don't get to throw other fish out of the net. Amen. And fish don't ultimately get to decide who swims in the river of life. Fish do fish things. So maybe you're thinking now, I just want to be a sheep. Sheep are amazing. Sheep get to roam the hills and be independent, go sleep out under the stars. They make nice, warm, woolly sweaters for people. That is a life of meaning and purpose. Who in the world wants to be a fish? Well, evidently, there were some Jewish Christians who were having second thoughts about the whole fish thing, too, after they heard this parable, because Jesus tells them a parable 11 chapters later about sheep and about goats, and the weird thing about that parable is it's exactly the same as this one. Only the animals change. Instead of being about fish and nets, it's sheep and goats. Exactly the same. All the nations are gathered together like a sheep with a shepherd, and you get to the fullness of time, and the angels come, and Christ comes, and he separates the sheep from the goats. So pick your metaphor, church: fish, sheep, wheat and weeds, guests at a wedding. Scour the scriptures. You're not going to find a metaphor where fish get to be anything other than fish. And in this blessed state where we, by the grace of God, are gathered together as fish, sheep, and sheaves. We give thanks. We are not left to the chaos of the sea. We are not forgotten. We are not without an inheritance. We are not alone. We are not left to die. We are gathered near to the saving presence of Christ with a tangible hope for a returning Eden. This is such good news. And true, fish don't get to ultimately decide who is in or who is out, but it really doesn't make life in the net unbearable. It makes it really hard, and it creates some opportunity for some really tough prayers. It's tough, I get that, but compared to the alternative, it is tolerable. After all, look at all these good fish in here. We're not alone. And it's definitely not boring. There's plenty to do. Gathering, discerning, unexpected friendship making, hanging out in here, teaching the eels the basics of diplomacy. Reading a book with those catfish who haven't been to school a day in their life. There's all kinds of things to do in here. Encouraging the dolphins to quit playing around and telling the hagfish to fix their face because they're scaring the angelfish who are just trying to lead us in worship, even though it's really not our style of worship. They're doing the best they can, exactly what they're supposed to do here among the gathered, where we are abiding and praising and discerning and struggling and confessing and anticipating and yearning and adoring the one who is caught up in this net with us, who absolutely, assuredly will take us home. Don't you want to be a fish?